Science fiction cinema of the early to mid-1970s was rife with dystopic visions of the future, of gritty portraits of a grim and cynical landscape dominated either by societal collapse or authoritarian control. Though many of these films have weathered the test of time and become revered classics, few of them were considered successes in their day, with critics lukewarm on them and audiences not turning out in numbers high enough to turn much of a profit. One film that did manage to be a modest box office success, though, centered on a future of violence and corporate domination, as epitomized by a popular sport called Rollerball.
Jonathan E. is perhaps the greatest rollerball player who ever lived, but his employers at the Energy Corporation, one of the 6 conglomerates that now rule the world, have decided that he is too much of an inspiration, that he has taken the focus away from the spirit of cooperation and conformity the game is supposed to inspire, and that he has given the people a dangerous taste for individual achievement. They try to convince Jonathan to retire, but the superstar rollerballer can't be coaxed with luxurious rewards or threatening words. Instead, he must settle his score in the arena, where the rules are being rewritten with one goal in mind: to defeat, humiliate, and maybe even kill the great Jonathan E.
Before we go any further, if you could hit that like button, it would help me fight back against my corporate overlords. If you really do like what I'm doing, make sure to subscribe to get more content. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. In 1973, Esquire magazine published a short story by author William Harrison called Rollerball Murder. The producer/director Norman Jewison, fresh off his Academy Award nominations for In the Heat of the Night and Fiddler on the Roof, bought the rights to the story with the intention of turning it into a film. Harrison then contacted Jewison and asked him if he could help, and the two men worked together to write up a treatment, which Harrison himself would later turn into the screenplay for Rollerball. With the script in place, Jewison, who wasn't well versed in science fiction or effects-heavy spectacle, set aside an unusually long period of pre-production to work out how to bring Rollerball to the screen. His first task was to figure out where and how he could make a rollerball track, which required a circular arena that could be used for an extended period. They settled on an Olympic stadium in Munich, West Germany, the Basketballhalle, now known as the Audidome. As a result, a lot of filming, not just the rollerball sequences, was done in Munich, with the BMW building and museum standing in for the Energy Corporation headquarters and the library. Jewison then hired an impressive collection of American, German, and British stuntmen, some of the best in the world, to be the rollerball players, who were so critical to the film that they actually got full credit listings, which was highly unusual for stuntmen at the time. Jewison also hired locals in Munich to fill the audience, though he had to give a lot of them extra money to convince them to cut their long hair. For the lead role of Jonathan E., Jewison turned to James Caan after seeing his Emmy-nominated performance as Chicago footballer Brian Piccolo in the ABC biopic Brian's Song. Caan, a major star following The Godfather and The Gambler, was an athletic actor and regular rodeo rider, with several championships under his belt. When he, the stuntman, and the rest of the cast began actually playing rollerball, which they needed to do in order to work out the rules and logistics of the game, he fell in love with it, and Jewison had to frequently remind Caan that he was training for a movie role, not a sporting event. For the main antagonist, Mr. Bartholomew, Jewison wanted a well-respected actor with gravitas, so he hired the prestigious John Houseman, a former member of the Mercury Theatre with Orson Welles, a highly regarded theater and film producer, the drama director at Juilliard, and an occasional actor who had just earned an Academy Award for his role in The Paper Chase.
Maybe you never knew it, but you've always tasted it.
Houseman is one of the film's highlights, filling Mr. Bartholomew with so much power, bottled anger, and slick persuasiveness that he is pretty much the devil incarnate. For the relatively minor role of the librarian, Jewison hired another stellar British stage actor, Ralph Richardson. Jonathan's teammate Moonpie is played by the relatively unknown John Beck a few years before he'd become known for his role in Dallas. The former rollerballer and Jonathan's friend Cletus is played by Moses Gunn, one of the most well-known African-American stage actors of the era, who'd earned film notoriety for his performance as Bumpy in Shaft, though I'll always think of him as the Empress's imperial physician.
You must go alone. You must leave all your weapons behind.
And for the role of Jonathan's lost love who offers him one last chance to retire before the final game, Jewison hired Maud Adams, hot off of her first of 2 turns as a Bond girl in The Man with the Golden Gun. Jewison hired Adams because she was a world-famous model who was quickly becoming an equally famous actress, and he thought all the female characters in the film needed that chiseled, model-like look to highlight how superficial and luxurious the future of Rollerball had become. When it came time to hire somebody to announce the Rollerball games, Jewison tested out several professional sports announcers from various fields, but few of them were capable of keeping up with the speed and complexity of the game. In the end, it was professional hockey announcers who were the best fit, and so Jewison managed to get the LA Kings' Bob Miller to call the first 2 games in the film. Miller is one of the best sports broadcasters of all time, and he continued announcing LA Kings games for several decades after Rollerball, until his retirement in 2017, after which he earned a statue next to Luc Robitaille and Wayne Gretzky outside the Staples Center.
And the puck comes to the right point. Duchesne shoots, save, rebound, shot, score! Kings win!
Rollerball released in June of 1975 to a pretty chilly critical reception. Despite this, it did relatively well at the box office, which was unusual for a science fiction film in the mid-'70s. There is a lot of confusion about how much it actually made, with estimates varying wildly between just over $6 million to as much as $30 million, but the general consensus is that the film turned a healthy profit. From a technical standpoint, it is a remarkable film, with the rollerball sequences standing out as well realized and impressively filmed. The game feels real and genuine, and Khan is believable as a successful champion facing the twilight of his career. When it comes to movies that combine the genres of science fiction and sports, it's one of the best examples. That said, this is a flawed film. Its tone is really awkward, the world isn't as well realized as the game itself, and there are 2 competing themes that don't quite mesh. The first theme focuses on the brutality of the sport, of how people respond more to violence than athleticism. Jewison, a Canadian hockey fan, was disturbed by this trend in professional ice hockey, where violence was seen as an essential element of the game, especially back in the early 70s when the Broad Street Bullies were tripping, slashing, and punching their way to 2 consecutive Stanley Cups. Thankfully, in the 21st century this trend is on the decline, but in all sports there is a persistent temptation to embrace the more brutalistic elements of the game in order to satisfy a bloodthirsty crowd. If taken to extremes, any sport driven by the salacious spectacle can thus become a blood sport, and that's what Rollerball is trying to demonstrate. The anti-blood sport message is challenged, though, by the choice to make Jonathan a character who loves Rollerball and whose only desire is to keep playing it. Even worse, until he suddenly shows mercy in the film's final moments, we see him remorselessly brutalize, even outright kill, several people. The message, I think, would have been far more effective had Jonathan been an unwilling player in Rollerball, someone whose only desire was to stop playing, but who was forced by his overlords to stay in it. However, such a change would have subverted the second theme of the film, that individuality is suppressed by the ever-growing corporate machine. Jonathan's entire life is controlled and rigidly constructed by his corporate overlords, who provide him with all the comforts he desires in exchange for total dominion over his choices. The central conflict of the story is built around this trade-off of individual liberty for a near-utopic prosperity where things like hunger and war have been completely eradicated, but where your love can be taken from you on a whim, your career can be taken out of your hands without you even being told why, and your agency means less than your value for the corporations that own you. It's got a heavy Brave New World vibe, especially when you see so many people popping pills in order to cope with their mandated conformity. While I don't think it would be impossible for the 2 themes of sports brutality and corporate control over the individual to coexist within one narrative, as a matter of fact I think Harrison's original story comes pretty close, I don't think Rollerball quite nails it. Sports lend themselves to hero worship, so treating Jonathan as an aberration that needs to be taken out of the game rings hollow. Even in professional hockey, where the culture values the team above the player, stars emerge and certain names printed on the back can double the price of a jersey. The themes then become muddled by the end, and the fact that audiences tend to walk away thinking that Rollerball might make for an entertaining sport in the real world is evidence enough that they aren't particularly effective. I also want to talk about this scene, in which drunken partygoers destroy some trees in order to demonstrate the callousness of people who destroy things for entertainment. The point it's trying to make would be a lot more salient if it weren't for the fact that the filmmakers are literally doing the same thing, destroying real trees for the sake of entertainment. It's indicative of the film's main flaw, the desire to satirize violence without any hint of self-awareness or even humor. Even with this flaw, though, Rollerball is an important film that clearly resonated with audiences of the mid-70s. The film hasn't endured as well as some of the other dystopias of the age, but its ideas are still perfectly valid. Without getting too political, it's easy to imagine a world where multinational corporations have taken the place of nation-states and where individuality has been lost in pursuit of permanent capital growth. It's also equally easy to imagine people glued to their television sets, cheering on as overpaid athletes pummel each other to death in a brutal spectacle. For these reasons alone, Rollerball is certainly worthy of consideration as a science fiction classic. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. Let me know in the comments what you think of Rollerball, but before you do, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you really do like what I'm doing, consider joining my Patreon, where you'll get access to bonus videos, vote on future topics, and more. You can also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty of other science fiction classics in both film and literature. Until next time, when we'll take a little vacation to another unusual genre hybrid, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
Nobody's gonna win this game! Game? This wasn't meant to be a game! Never!